Oh, let me get that going. Okay. So first of all, thank you all for joining us for our first Launch and Learn workshop of the semester. Normally we do these during the lunch hour and they're called Lunch and Learns. But since we aren't able to provide you all lunch, we decided to kind of reframe it and we're calling them Launch and Learns. So today we are super excited to have Mike Schwabenbauer and Jeremy White, who are the TRIO director and tutor coordinator, who are going to be talking to us about academic skills and some of, just kind of brushing up on some tips on how to be successful academically. Before I turn it over to Mike, I do want to just make a quick announcement about the food pantry. So just a reminder that the food pantry is now up and running. On Wednesdays, we will be having curbside pickup from 10 to 2 behind the Success Center, behind Main Hall at the Success Center doors. And as of today, we've actually extended the curbside pickup to Tuesdays from 11 to 12. Okay, and I'll be sending more information out about that, but I got some feedback. Some folks had classes like pretty much the whole day on Wednesday. So we wanted to kind of open it up a little bit for folks that might have class on Wednesday. So write that down. We are also doing curbside 11 to 12 on Tuesdays. So that's my big announcement. We will be having more Launch and Learns this semester. Our next one will probably not be next week, but the week after. We'll make sure we get a flyer and some information out about that as soon as possible, but just keep an eye on your EMCC email. That's where we'll be sending you some information about that. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Mike.
Thanks, Tasha. This is a really awesome turnout. Thanks everybody for listening to me talk for a little bit. And so Rick asked me to talk a little bit about kind of things that I've seen in my life as a teacher and like why students are successful and why they're not. But before I talk about that, I kind of wanted to tell my story a little bit because I think this covers some of the topics directly and indirectly. So if you look at my resume, you may think, oh, you got a master's degree, pretty smart guy, probably always been a pretty smart guy. And that's really not the case at all. School to me was the intellectual equivalent of playing with one's food. It was just really unappealing to me. Every single one of my high school teachers taught the same thing every year. They had the textbook memorized. They weren't creative. And so because of that, I didn't try harder than I needed to. So I graduated high school. I guess this kind of will show you how old I am. I just turned 40. I graduated high school in 1999. And in 1999, there were 99 people in my graduating class. I was number 49. So not showing off, not falling behind. That was basically kind of me in a nutshell. And then so I went to college, not because I really wanted to go to college, but because I just didn't really know what else to do. Obviously the military wasn't for me because I don't like haircuts, right? Jeremy's smirking, okay.
I got
so,
it.
Yeah. So, and I had some crappy jobs in high school too. I had a paper route, for a couple years where I got up at like 4:30 every morning and took a nap after school every day. And then I washed dishes at a seafood restaurant for 3 years. Well, I came home just wet and smelly. And, I was like, obviously I don't want to do this the rest of my life. And I wanted to do something better with myself, but I didn't really know what or how. So I went to a college. I grew up in Northwest Pennsylvania, a place called Oil City, which was by the birthplace of the oil industry. And it was a place where it was just dying. Like the population was 16,000, I think, when I was in middle school. And by the time I finished college, it was half of that because all the oil plants had been torn down and sent to South America. It was pretty sad. So I knew it was not a place, it was a nice place to grow up, but not a place I wanted to live. So I needed a ticket out of there. So I went to college about 4 hours away at one of the branch campuses at the University of Pittsburgh. It's called Pitt Johnstown. My first semester did not go well. I kind of thought that high school, I just was on cruise control, and I thought, okay, I can just turn on a switch and all of a sudden I'll do well. And I realized that I didn't have the skills to do that. There's a difference between being clever and being smart, and I was clever and not smart. So my first semester, I'll be honest with all of you, I took 4 classes. I failed 2 of them. I had a 1.67 GPA. And, you know, my parents could not afford to help me financially. I took out loans for all of that. And then I just kind of like had a real, you know, talk with myself, kind of like, what am I doing? I'm wasting money. Like maybe I can't hack it. And then so after that semester, somebody gave me a book to read called Survivor by Chuck Palahniuk, and the book just really changed my life. And maybe you guys have heard of Fight Club. He wrote that book too. But anyway, so this book is about this guy who's the last member of a religious cult, and people are trying to kill him and doesn't know why. But the book is actually a metaphor for the education system and how most teachers just train students to be good employees, to fit in, not to empower them, not for them to create their own business. And I realized that adults have been lying to me my whole life. And it was just really an eye-opener. And so that was my gateway book. And so, you know, people talk about gateway drugs. That was my gateway book. And so I started reading all the time. And I started taking education seriously. I transferred to a 2-year college close to where I grew up. It was a branch campus of Clarion University. And so then I just started taking things very seriously. And before I knew it, I was reading all the time. I was reading like 50 plus books a year for those first couple years. But reading alone did not do much for me. So I finished at the 2-year school. I pretty much took everything that I could, you know, as cheaply as possible. And then I started working in the writing center there, and that kind of helped me build some skills and confidence. But then when I switched to the main campus, you know, I started taking 3 to 4 lit classes a semester. And I looked around me and man, these people were well read and they were way smarter than me. And so I was like, okay, I can read a lot of books, but I'm going to have to do more if I'm going to catch up to these people. So I started doing a couple of different things differently. The first thing I did was I looked up every word in the dictionary that I did not know. And it's something that I still do to this day. Even though I'm hyper literate to some degree, I still have words that I don't know, that I forget, that I have to look up. So what I did was, for an entire year in college, I wrote down every word in a journal that I did not know and the definition. And then every once in a while, I would just look at that journal and go through those words again. And still to this day, I have those 400 plus words committed to memory. That's why I have useless knowledge, like the word tyro means an amateur or a beginner, you know. And so and I honestly, I'll be honest how nerdy I was at one point. I would actually just read the dictionary just for kicks. Like check out the letter V. There's some awesome words in there. So that's kind of what I did. And so the other thing is, I just decided that, so I was a commuter. I didn't live on campus. And I had about a 40-minute drive each way. So I had a lot of time to kill. I was there all day. So I would, you know, go to Subway every day and get a sub and do some homework, do some reading. But I had more time to kill than that. So I started going to office hours of all my professors. And I was shocked, like most of my professors, like nobody showed up during their office hours. So I would go to them and just like start picking their brains about, hey, like what should I read? Or that was really interesting what you talked about in class. Can you like talk a little bit more about that? And they would just tell their stories, you know, about you know, what they studied in college and what college was like for them. And, you know, we kind of developed a friendship to some degree, but I just got so much knowledge from them. And I was so surprised at how eager they were to talk to me all the time. And so I know now I'm interested to hear maybe a little bit later from some of you about how virtual office hours are going. So now you can't just pop into main hall and talk to your professor for a half an hour. You have to kind of do it virtually. So maybe after I'm done talking, some of you guys can talk about how that's going, because I know that's different. But if your professor has virtual office hours, I would really encourage you to take advantage of that, because it's really critical. The other thing I did that you can't do now is I sat in the front row of every single class that I had. I made it a point the first day of classes to get there about 15 to 20 minutes early. I would sit in the front row so I wouldn't be distracted. Of course, then my poetry professor threw me for a loop, and we sat in a circle, you know, and I'm in there with like, it was like me and one other guy and 25 girls. And so it was hard. It was hard to stay focused in that class, but otherwise I think I did a pretty good job. So that's something, but I mean now, like, what can you do? You can't sit in the front row, but at the same time, like, you can go to the Zoom link a little bit early. You can have your notebook out. or Microsoft Word, ready to type your notes, free of distractions. Have the door to your office closed if you have one. Make sure your cat and dog aren't in the room if possible, or your kids are watching something in another room. Whatever you got to do to be prepared and be focused. But once you guys get back in a real classroom, I hope you can at some point. I think sitting in the front row is huge, and it helped me stay focused. And because I just knew myself, I'm kind of easily distracted, especially if you have like ADHD or something, or ADD. Like, if you know that about yourself, take steps to kind of nip it in the bud whenever you could. So that's another thing that I did that I think was really helpful. Let's see. Oh, the other thing that I did and that I encourage my students to do is, so I'm left-handed and I'm an English major, and I'm a guy. So that's like a triple whammy. That means I have really bad handwriting. So, when I became an English teacher, I had to type out my comments to students because they just couldn't read my handwriting. So when I was in class and when I was a student, I also just had bad handwriting and I would write super quickly. So what I would do is, usually like right after that class or later that evening, I would go home and I would type out my notes and organize my thoughts. But I would also think about other things that was said that maybe I didn't have time to write down, or that I forgot that I could add to it. And honestly, that strategy alone, I think, really helped me not only prepare for tests, but just to understand the material a lot better. And it's something that I still recommend that people do. Because I don't know what you guys are doing during class. I don't know if you're typing stuff out, if you're writing stuff down. But going back and adding more detail and organizing a little bit better, I think is a really good idea. Probably the major thing that I did, and maybe some of you won't like what I have to say about this, but I don't know if you've ever seen this triangle. It says pick 2 out of the 3: good grades, sleep, social life. And so when I got to college and started taking it seriously, I decided to nix out the social life pretty much. I made sure that I got at least 7 or 8 hours of sleep. So I basically made this arrangement with myself where I said I would not do anything fun or hang out with anybody or do anything aside from maybe eat until I got everything done for the next day. So whatever paper I had to do, whatever reading that I had to get done. And I did that pretty religiously all the way through college. And yeah, some of my friendships may have suffered as a result, but I still found time to, go hiking and fishing, and still got to do things, It doesn't have to be all or nothing. Like, you still have to do things for yourself, and you still have family and friends, but at the same time, you have to prioritize. You have to remember, why are you in college to begin with, right? You're investing in yourself. This is not cheap. Many of you are taking out loans. You have to look at the big picture, and sometimes you have to make short-term sacrifices. And so you have to figure out which ones are you willing to make. And I decided that's the one that I had to make. And I honestly don't have any regrets about that now. I don't know about you, but out of those 99 people I went to high school with, I still talk to 2 of them. Like, you often just lose touch with those people, So, I mean, to me, that wasn't that big of a deal. The other thing that I want to bring up is, I mentioned I worked in the Writing Center at the 2-year campus that I started at. And that was so helpful to me professionally. And so I would encourage you, I know a lot of people don't like to have a work study job or maybe do something related to their major because it might not pay as well as another job off campus. But people who have a work study job do better. Their grades are higher. There's plenty of data to back that up. But also, like, in terms of professional experience and having resume builders, having a job in the service industry doesn't look as well as having a work study job related to what you're going to end up doing. And that's going to give you an edge in getting that entry-level position when you're done at EMCC or wherever you transfer to. So don't forget that. Ask us, and other people, what other related work study opportunities are there related to what you want to do? What volunteer opportunities, what job shadowing opportunities are there that you can do now that are going to help you down the line? And that's something that I think doesn't get talked about enough, because that ended up being really helpful for me. But anyway, so going back to my story a little bit, so I was humming along, I started reading books. All of a sudden I started getting, straight A's. And then I was just reading books and talking about it and loving it. And I had a professor who I would visit in office hours often, who I respected more than anybody. And he kept me after class one day and wanted to talk to me, and he closed the door. I was like, oh man, what did I do? And he was like, so what do you, I'm like, I don't know, Dr. McCarrick, like, what should I do? He's like, honestly, I really don't know what your options are. He's like, I think you should be a teacher. And I was like, oh man, I don't like kids. And he was like, no, I'm not talking about little kids. He's like, I'm talking about, young adults, high school. So he convinced me to be a high school English teacher. And so, but that cost me an extra year in college. That cost me an extra year of student loan debt. And so I ended up graduating. I didn't like all of my education classes, to be honest with you. I love my English classes. The education classes were okay, but I did well in them, and I wanted to be employed because at the time that seemed more important to me, just because I was so uncertain about so many things and didn't really have anybody else to ask advice of. So fast forward to 2005. I'm the first person in my family to get a college degree. I graduated with highest honors. I had a 3.8 something GPA. Despite that horrible start, I recovered, I rallied. I was, really proud of myself. All the professors who helped me along the way, I was eternally grateful for. And then I moved to Montana. I actually had a summer job in Yellowstone National Park, and I went back there every summer. Played with grizzly bears and got chased up a tree by a moose one time and had all kinds of cool adventures. And then, so that was awesome. And I was a high school English teacher for 3 years, where I was the English department in a small town. I mean, there were 4 different communities that made up one school district. Like, I taught 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th grade English. I was the English department. I taught 112 to 120 students a year. And I did that for 3 years, and I loved it, every minute of it. And then one of my friends was like, hey, we should go to grad school together. So we all applied to the University of Arizona, and none of us got in because it's super competitive. But I was the only person who actually applied to a backup school. So I applied to the University of Montana, and I was a resident there. So I got in-state tuition. They offered me a TA-ship. So I taught college composition, and in exchange, they gave me free tuition and $900 a month for cheese and bread. So I taught college comp to students younger than me, students older than me, and got to hone my skills a little bit more. And I kept up the same patterns in undergrad that helped me in grad school. I sat in the front row, talked to my professors. I read all the time. I didn't do a lot of social stuff unless I absolutely had everything done and had the time. And so I finished that with highest honors too. I graduated with a 3.9 something, and I got 1 A- that I'm still really bitter about. I don't know about you, but I know Tasha's like this too. Like, we are, maybe this is not healthy and I shouldn't talk about this, but we are obsessed with grades, and like anything less than an A and what we deserve kind of really sticks in your craw. So anyway, so I ended up getting a master's degree in English, taught for a few more years in Northwest Montana near Glacier National Park on the Flathead Indian Reservation, actually, for a few years. And then I decided to kind of make a switch. My dad had some health issues. I wanted to be closer to him. I moved back to a different part of Pennsylvania so I could be a little bit closer to him while still not living in my hometown and living in a bigger city. And I worked for a different TRIO program for 5 years called Talent Search, where I worked with inner city high school students and took them on college tours, helped them do their FAFSA and that kind of stuff before I came here. But that's kind of my story. But it was not easy. It was really hard. I still have $699.13 of student loans to pay off out of $50,000. It's a long struggle. And when you're the only person in your family who's done it, and you don't have other people to ask, it makes it more challenging. So I hope that you guys can learn from some of my struggles and some of my lessons, because that's what TRIO is all about, is learning from one another and learning from other people's mistakes, because some of us are more open about them than others. So Rick actually had some specific talking points he wanted me to talk about, so I did want to touch on those briefly. He wanted me to talk about organization. And honestly, I told Tasha she should probably talk about this because she's way more organized than I am. So every day, list on a big legal pad. And so I get the to-do list from the day before. I write down what I didn't get done the day before, because I almost never get everything done in one day. And then I go back through my email from the day before, like what do I still need to follow up on? I put that on my list. I think about, okay, what else needs to get done that I haven't thought about? And then that's my list for the day. And then after I write my list, I usually just put an asterisk or a star beside whatever I think I have to get done right away. And that's very simple and has worked for me, pretty much. I did it as a teacher. I still do it now, and I'll probably continue to do it. I'm really big on lists. I make grocery lists. I make lists of all kinds of different things. So that really helps me to stay organized. And it's weird now because I love physical copies, and having a physical copy is important to my literacy. And now, not having a printer at home, I have to do things digitally. So typically I have binders with sticky notes and things like that. So now I just have to make sure that the files on my Microsoft Word documents are really organized. So I don't know what you guys are doing, but if you have like College Comp, you should make a folder, College Comp, and then make a folder for every major assignment, and then keep all your rough drafts and everything else in there for each one. That's what helps me, is to be able to find things quickly, because you get to a certain point, especially by the time you're almost done with college, like you're going to have a lot of files, you're going to have a lot of documents. And if you want to find something 2 years later, if you don't have it clearly labeled and organized, you might kick yourself for not doing a good job a little bit early. So that's something that I would recommend. Rick also asked me to kind of talk about kind of goal setting a little bit. And I'm not a big goal setting person. I don't think too far ahead. But at the same time, like if your goal is to get an A in a class, that's good. But okay, you need to get more specific. How are you actually going to get an A in that class? What do you have to do? Do you need to get tutoring sessions 2 times per week? You need to make sure that you turn in your drafts early to your professor for additional feedback. You know what I mean? Like, what else do you need to do to make that happen? So make sure you can kind of break that out and get a little more micro on that, so you can get more specific about what you have to do. Because sometimes I try not to get too big picture about things. I try and just go kind of day to day. What do I have to get done now to be successful and do the work that I need to do? And I try not to look 5, 10. I would encourage you not to get too broad with your goals. Try and keep them specific. Also about like staying organized. So Tasha and I were talking about this today. If it's not in my calendar, it doesn't exist. So if I put everything in my calendar, everything. So if I have an appointment with a student, if I have something that's due, I have to go to the chiropractor, whatever it is, it's in my calendar. And as soon as I get done talking about that, or I make that plan with that person, I put it in my calendar right away, because if I don't, I'll forget about it. And I know that about myself, and so I'm preemptive. So I don't know if you guys are using Google Calendar or Outlook Calendar, and this is really tricky because all of EMCC uses Outlook. And I know a lot of students prefer Gmail. And honestly, all of us probably secretly prefer Gmail, but we have to use Outlook. So for the sake of like being on the same page with your professors and us, honestly, using Outlook Calendar, I think, is a really smart idea. And sometimes you might need to do Google and Outlook calendars for the same events, and that's okay too. But does anyone know, can you sync Google and Outlook together? Because I've never been able to figure that out. Does anybody know? Jennifer, it can be done?
I was going to say, yeah, it looks like Jennifer is saying it can be done. I think there is a way. I just am not sure how.
There's a certain file extension that if you export it as and then import it into the other, that it should. And then sometimes I think you can even set it up to automatically import from one or the other in the settings. I believe Outlook has that feature. Actually, no, it was Samsung I was just looking at that could do that. But anyway, I'm sure some of those can too as well.
Right. Thank you for that.
Yeah, thanks. And so the other thing I would mention is, so say you have an assignment due at midnight. Are you going to put that in your calendar as whatever due at midnight? Like if I were you, I would put it due at 7 or 8 o'clock so that you get a reminder and get it done a little bit earlier. And that kind of leads to the last thing Rick wanted me to talk about, which was like starting strong and not procrastinating. And so I've met a lot of high school students in my life who look at procrastination like a badge of honor. Like they're proud that they stayed up until 3 a.m. and got something done at the last minute. And like, and personally, I'm really against that mindset. Like, okay, maybe you got it done, but is it good? Did you have time to revise? Were you actually mentally sharp at that hour? So I always break things into chunks. So I don't know, has anyone like driven cross country? Like if, you know, especially if you have to drive through like North Dakota, for example, which is the worst state in the country, you can't just be like, oh man, I got to drive through North Dakota. You're like, okay, I got to get to Fargo. After I get to Fargo, I get to Grand Forks. After I get to Grand Forks, I get to Teddy Roosevelt National Park, the only highlight of that state. So even my commute to work. So I have on a really glorious day, I can get from my house to work in 25 minutes, but that is broken up into 4 different sections. So, and so I just kind of mentally tick them off as I'm going. I do the same thing with assignments. I break them into chunks. So I always start things early, whether it's a rough draft or just making some notes. I always start things early, and I do a little bit every single day of every project. I did that as a student, and I often do that with some of my day-to-day work, because if you get to the last day and something is due and you haven't done anything, I'm sorry, it's probably just not going to be good. That's the reality. So start breaking things up into chunks, because not only is the product going to be better, but for your mental health and anxiety, it's going to be a lot better too. Because you realize like that last day, you don't have a lot to do. All you have to do is like, if you're editing a paper, you got to read it out loud or have somebody look at it, or just kind of go over those notes for a 4th or 5th time for the test that you have coming up. And for me, like that just helps my anxiety a lot, just kind of breaking things up into chunks. And also, I mean, here we are a couple weeks in the semester. So maybe this is even too late for some people, but usually like, you know, after this point in the semester, like right now, today, as a teacher, who's going to make it and who's not, right? I mean, if you fall behind early and dig yourself in a hole, it's really hard to get out of it. And oftentimes what I see happen is students, their anxiety compounds, things snowball, they shut down, they go, I can't do this, and they want to drop out. Good news is that all of you have TRIO if you fall behind, and you have help, and it's not too late. As I said before, I had an awful first semester. I rallied, I came back. It can be done. A lot of people do it. But when you put yourself in that early hole, it's really hard to get out of. And if you find yourself in catch-up mode, sometimes it's hard to stay ahead of things. I think about COVID. If you guys think back to like, you know, all the rave alerts that were coming out from EMCC, for those of you who were here, it was just like every day something new was happening and they were changing their policy and they couldn't stay ahead of it. And now they've had time to plan and they've really thought out this semester, and they're doing a really good job with how things are organized and keeping people safe and healthy. And I think, you know, school is the same way. You know, if you can't stay in front of it, there's chaos, but when you can stay ahead of it and you can have a plan, then all of that goes away, and I think you can be successful. So that's the end of my spiel. I don't know, Tasha, Rick, if you want to turn it over to Jeremy now, or open it to questions for me now, or just do all the questions at the end.
Yeah, so I think what we'll do is let's turn it over to Jeremy, and if you have some questions, make sure you write them down, and we'll save a couple minutes at the end for questions. But Mike, thank you so much for sharing your story, because you know, all of the things you sort of identified along your own journey, these are great pieces of advice, right? Things that Mike has learned, you know, we've all learned through going through it ourselves and figuring out what works best for us. So that was really, really awesome. Thank you again, Mike. All right, now I'm going to turn it over to our tutor coordinator, Jeremy White.
All right. Hello, everybody. I wish we were doing this on campus, because I'd really like to see a whole bunch of your faces in person. You know, it'd be nice. I wish we were on campus, but we're not on campus. We're going to make the most of it. And I've got 3 talking points today. I do want to emphasize that I am also strongly against North Dakota, just like Mike. Very much anti-North Dakota. Even South Dakota can just go pound sand, right? So I'm going to start with this, and this is going to sound a bit outlandish, but it's true. every person who's ever earned $1 million chose to earn $1 million. And you think, I can't just choose to be a millionaire, and I would strongly disagree. Every person who chose to become a millionaire also chose to make all the sacrifices and do all the hard work that it takes to become a millionaire. And so the analogy for us is that you can choose to be a good student, okay? This is not a smart versus dumb scenario. I'm talking about you can choose to be a good student. There are skills that you can have, already have, and can learn that'll make you a good student. So Mike talked about the triangle and picking two, and I was going to do something very similar. I won't steal his, I'll just echo his sentiments, okay? You can choose to make certain sacrifices in your life that will make school a priority. It can be hard, no doubt, especially single parents, anybody with children, disabilities, etc., can make that hard, but you can do it. So my first talking point is about seeking help, either from instructors and or TRIO and or the tutoring center. So real quick question out to everybody, raise your hand or something. How many of you have ever emailed an instructor only to not get a response or definitely not get the response you were looking for, right? I'm on that list too, okay? I've been a college student. I know what that's like. It can seem hopeless sometimes. The good news is that being in TRIO, you have access to additional help that not all of the students have access to. So your instructors have obligations. There's only so much that they have to do outside of the classroom and their office hours, right? They're contracted, they're unionized. There's only so much they have to do. So some of them, though, will help you. Some of them will go above and beyond that, and we can all tell a story about an instructor we know who did that for us. Mike shared his story. They don't have to do that, but man, what an amazing difference it can make when they do. But here's what you can do to tip the odds in your favor, because I've been an instructor, Mike, Tasha, Liz Russell here. Everybody's been an instructor. I don't have all the time in the world to help every student that needs help outside of class, but I can. You know, I'm not saying I ignore one student in favor of another, but I tell you, I'm way more likely to help a student who comes to class, who participates in class, who is active in class, whether that's online class or in-person class, a student that's nice to others, a student that is not a distraction in class, who's not playing on their phone in class. I've had students that play on their phone all class, and the next day come to my office and they want tutoring. And I'm like, you wouldn't need tutoring maybe if you paid attention in class. I don't know, maybe that's a hard pill to swallow. I mean, phones are amazing, but you know, again, you've got to choose, you've got to make that right choice. Let's see. So that's one way to tip the odds in your favor if you need help from an instructor. Another way that you can get help is through tutoring. And so I'm the tutor coordinator for the college, and since you're in TRIO, you have direct access to me. You can always email me directly, the letter J, last name White at amcc.edu. But if you don't remember that, just remember tutoring at amcc.edu. Let's see, Jennifer Hodgins is on this call. She's actually one of our tutors. She's kind of a general purpose tutor, a little bit of everything. So maybe you've worked with her, but I have other tutors that you can work with as well. But other help that you can get is just TRIO in general. TRIO is, if you had to slap like a sticker on TRIO, like we're here to help. So we're help do advising, and we help do, you know, it's kind of like coaching. You know, we got mentors. Geez, there's just so much help. So the fact that all of you are here participating is a bit like preaching to the choir. So thank you for coming. The next talking point that Rick gave me to look at was examples I've seen of habits or actions that have worked or hindered a student's success. Oh boy, this is a long list. I won't go over all of it. But I want, as I say these things, I want you to ask yourself, is this something you do or something you don't do? If it's something you don't do, then the good news is that you can choose to start doing it. You might have to sacrifice time or effort with loved ones or with work, but you can choose to do it. So the very first one, and probably the one that makes the biggest difference, is going to class. Okay, just purely showing up day after day demonstrates the effort that we're looking for, whether that's a virtual class, whether that's an in-person class, attendance. Like Mike said, 3 weeks into a semester, I could tell you exactly who's going to pass and not pass every class I've ever taught. Occasionally there's a surprise, and it's always good when someone I didn't think was going to pass ends up passing. And it's not the students that ace the first exam. That's not it at all. I can tell 3 weeks in who's got the good habits and who's got the bad habits. And the very first big one is attendance. Okay, the next one is attitude. Okay? Having an attitude of, I will do this, I can do this, I can do this with help, is way different than having an attitude of, I hate math, I can't do this, I won't do this, why am I even taking this class? Okay, having the right attitude is going to help aid and abet your motivation so that you are going to class and you're doing those other good habits that you need. This next one is hard to do, but if you can do it, then you will see changes immediately. So we've all done this. There's a difference between taking and passing a class and actually taking and learning the material of the class. Okay. I've taken classes where the goal was just, I just need to see in this class so I can pass it and move on with my life. But there's other classes where I'm like, this is my major. This is what I'm going to do. I need to know this stuff because someday I'm going to have to do it. So here's just some general advice. It doesn't apply to every class because every class can be structured differently. But number one, reading ahead. Even math class, read ahead, read the chapter. If tomorrow in class your teacher is lecturing on chapter 4, read chapter 4 today. Take notes while you read that chapter. If there's example problems, do those example problems. Think of questions, like if there's parts of the material that you're not understanding, that's a question that you have, and then you can ask it in class. Here's why this works. When you go to class tomorrow and the teacher is lecturing on chapter 4, you're not hearing it for the first time. You only retain, I don't even know what the numbers are, but it's like 20% of what you hear for the first time. So if you're not hearing it for the first time, you're going to retain more of it. You're also paying attention because you've read it, and you're looking to key into those parts that you didn't understand. That also tells you where you need to ask questions. Like, hey, teacher, I didn't understand Maslow's hierarchy of needs, that kind of a thing. I just pulled that out of somewhere. So that coming to class prepared, if you try this, if you can, if you're not doing it already, try it for one class. And wait until you see the difference when you take that first test and you're like, I already know this stuff. Like, I'm going to ace this test because I know it. I didn't just, eat it and then spit it back out and move on to the next thing. I actually learned it. So please give that a try. All right. And then the last thing that of good habits is when students struggle, what do I see? So the good habits is they get help. They either ask me, the instructor, for help, or they seek tutoring or mentoring, but they seek help in some form. It's, at least in TRIO, you know where to go. You come to us. And students that aren't in TRIO, there's still resources for them, but maybe it's not as clear as to where they go for help, but it is for TRIO. So hopefully TRIO pays off for everybody. Okay, my last talking point. Let's see, what was it? It was, prepping for tests. Okay. So if you've had me as an instructor, Val had me as an instructor. Some of you maybe have had me as instructor. Every test I've ever given, I give the students a copy of it the week before with different numbers. I'm a math teacher. So the students know exactly what types of questions are going to be on the exam. They know exactly, I give them an answer key to it. They know how to do the answers. I show them my work in the answer key. So if your teacher does that, that's maximum through it until you can do all of the problems. I tell my students, don't waste time studying something you already know. So for example, if you're doing a fractions exam and you already know how to add fractions, you don't need to study adding fractions. But if multiplying fractions gives you grief, then you need to study multiplying fractions. So it's kind of a weird sentence, right? But if you know that you know it, then you don't need to study it. If you know what you don't know, then that's what you need to study. It's funny to say it, but it's true. Okay, if your teacher allows a page of notes, like a cheat sheet, if they're allowing notes, you need to have that prepped ahead of time. I know too many students that prep it in the 5 minutes before class. That's not going to do you any good. You're not going to know where to reference that information. You need to prepare that sheet ahead of time. I'm going to let you in on a secret. I made a cheat sheet for every exam I ever took in college. Okay. I wasn't always allowed a cheat sheet. So if I was allowed a cheat sheet, I'd bring it. If I wasn't allowed a cheat sheet, I wouldn't bring it. But here's why I did it. The process of actually going through the material and putting down on the cheat sheet what I thought was important or what I didn't know and I needed to be able to reference helped me learn it. Just the process of writing it down onto paper helped me learn it. And then when I got into the test, I had the mental recall to picture myself making that cheat sheet, and I'd be like, that's right. That's Maslow's second level of needs, that kind of a thing. I certainly had to do it for classes that weren't mathematical because I don't learn as well in those classes. Okay, if your exam is open book, it probably means that the exam is harder than a normal exam. Every time I've given an open book exam or like a take-home exam, my students salivate. And I can show you the data proves that scores on take-home exams are worse than in-person, in-class exams. Students don't take them as serious. They wait to the last minute. They don't prep because why would I prep if I have open notes and open book? But they don't realize that the test is tougher. And if the test is tougher, you've got to know where to reference that stuff. You've got to know. So open book should not be a sign of relief. It means it's a tougher exam. You're going to have to work harder. Okay. And I think this is another great way to prepare for a test. So let's say I go back to my fractions example. You've identified that you know how to add, subtract fractions, but you don't know how to multiply and divide them. If you've got somebody that you can work with, maybe a friend, another student, if you've got somebody you can work with, try explaining to them how to multiply fractions. Hopefully, if they already know how, then they can help correct you. But if you work with a tutor and say, hey, let me explain to you how to multiply fractions, you'll become really aware really quick whether you understand it or not. Because if you understand it, you can explain it. If you can't, then you don't know it as well as maybe you should, and you got to go back and you got to work on it, and that's okay. Right? That's part of that process. Not everybody has access to another person, no. But my tutors will do that for you. So if you just need a study buddy. And by the way, so last thing, and this just, I meant to talk about this earlier. When we tutor, we can tutor academic subjects, right? We can tutor chemistry, history, math, etc. We can also tutor these study skills that I'm talking about. So Autumn and Rick are on this call. Jennifer's on this call. Any of my tutors can also do time management, note-taking, test preparation, organization, the things that Mike talked about. So if you're thinking, I could just use like an hour with somebody to help me get organized, hit us up, okay? Hit up your mentor. Your mentor can probably help you do that, but I certainly have tutors that can help you do that as well. So yeah, I only talked half as long as Mike. That's all I've got for you, Tasha. Thanks for having me, everybody. Good to see your faces. Hopefully we're back in school in person soon.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jeremy. That was, again, just a fantastic kind of overview of some of these really key pieces of advice, right? That, as we're starting the new semester, keeping some of this stuff in mind. I mean, these are amazing strategies that Mike and Jeremy have gone over today about just tips and tricks, right, on how to be successful academically. And I can say that everything I've heard are things that I've also done. So, these are kind of tried and true, methods of working your way through some of those challenges. So really awesome advice. So we do have a couple minutes. Now I wanted to open it up. If anyone has any questions, any comments, anything they wanted to, ask Mike or Jeremy. We also have Rick and Autumn, who are our tutors. They're also peer mentors. I've also got Val on the call and Kerry, who are also peer mentors. So we've got a whole bunch of folks on the call right now that can certainly, help with answering some questions or giving some advice. So if you got something on your mind, just, raise your hand and I'll call on you. Yes, Brenda, go ahead.
I thought of this one about tutors. How about for culinary?
Okay, that's a good question, right? Go ahead, Jeremy.
Yeah, so I actually don't have a culinary tutor. I can make a mean pot roast, but You know, in fact, I don't have like a welding tutor. I don't have a construction tutor. A lot of the actual like tech programs we don't have tutors for. And so what happens is I'll reach out to that instructor if you really needed sometimes it's like, do you need help writing a paper? I know culinary may not do papers like traditional papers, but if a student needs help doing a paper, I can hook them up with Rick, Autumn, Jennifer, that type of thing. But if they need help with the actual content of the course, then I'll reach out to the program director and I'll, hey, Jay, any student that you can recommend. And if you're a TRIO student, we'll hire somebody, probably hire them under the TRIO umbrella to work with you. It's not uncommon, it happens.
Because like last semester, I struggled real hard. It was
Yeah.
like the conversions.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, math for
Yeah,
cooking math. I
Yeah.
know, as a mathematician, cooking math's oddly difficult.
Mhm.
yes, it is. I'm still struggling.
Get a tutor, Brenda. Get a tutor.
Yeah, definitely.
Awesome. That was a great question. All right. I just saw a hand. Alyssa, did you have something you wanted to share?
Yeah, hi. I was just wondering what the typical hours for tutoring were. Like, is there a specific like 7 to 5, or do you do after hours? Because I typically work 7 to 5 throughout the week. So it would work better if I could do after 5, but I can also try to do like on my lunch hour from 12 to 1, or I can try to be lenient if I have to.
Okay, good question. So when we're in when we're in the college, then all the tutoring pretty much happens in the Success Center. The tutors maintain regular hours. Like Samuel is there every Wednesday from 10 to 3, and you just know he's there, and you can make appointments or just drop in and see him. Right now, almost all tutoring is you, Alyssa, like let's say you wanted math tutoring. I would hook you up with Samuel. You and Samuel would then have an email conversation where you established when you wanted to be tutored. Because Samuel will tutor people at night if that's what they want. I think he'd prefer to work during the day, but he will do some night hours. And so you and Samuel could agree to meet at 2 a.m. on a Saturday online if that's what you wanted. And he agreed to it. If you can't come to an agreement on a time with a tutor, then we hook you up with another tutor and we go through that process again. But it's always seemed to just kind of work out. I think I am going to start some drop-in tutoring soon, at least for math and probably English as well, where you'll know, like, we'll post a Zoom link and you'll know that Samuel is sitting in front of his computer from, I'm again making this up, 10 to 2 on a Thursday. And so if you have lunch from 12 to 1, you could pop in and ask him a couple questions, that kind of a thing.
Yeah, I don't think I'd ask him to do it at 2 a.m.
Right.
No, that's your joke.
It does happen.
I can usually like work around times. I just need to know, like I'd have to, like you said, email him and see what time would work for him and for me. Typically, I'd probably need a little more tutoring in the math department because that's not my strongest suit anyways. So I guess I would reach out to him. Other classes like anatomy and physiology, I would just look for more like studying skills. So I don't think I'd typically need tutoring for that, but
Yeah.
math definitely I'd need to get for that.
Alyssa, sounds like you need a tutor. Tutoring at emcc.edu. You email, that'll go to me. Mike's the backup on that, and I'll CC you with a tutor right away.
Sweet. Thank you for your help.
You're welcome.
Some of us love tutoring on weekends.
You guys hear me?
Hi, Rick.
Did
You guys hear me?
Are you trying to talk, Rick?
Yeah, it's not working.
I can hear you. Yes, we can hear you now.
I just wanted to talk about, I'm glad that Alyssa brought that up. I don't know if I'm yelling or not because this camera, it makes me seem like I'm at the end of some precipice, but I'm really right here. That's a really good question about the timing for the tutoring because I get that a lot now. And it's, with stuff that's not really math, what I recommend students do is any document, any paper that you're writing, anything that you're writing, put it into Google Docs and then share that with your tutors. How it works best for me is if you're working on something and you share it with me on Google Docs, that's a living document. So whenever I have time during the day, I can go back into that thing and I can work on it for 5 minutes if I have 5 minutes. I can work on it for 2 hours if I have 2 hours. And then it automatically saves. And the next time you go in and look at it, you can work right from that same document. So everyone is pressed for time, especially if you work hours that might conflict with you getting the help. If you don't necessarily need to talk to someone on Zoom, then the best thing that I have found is to use Google Docs and just share those documents, and we can work together. If you want to work together in real time, we can work together. But for the most part, I've had no complaints about working in Google Docs. I tend to leave pretty long comments, and I'm pretty specific. And if your tutors know their way around G Suite stuff, it can be super comprehensive and oftentimes better than just talking through something on Zoom.
Yeah, thank you for that, Rick. Really good point about, just kind of using some of the digital tools that we have on hand at this point, because it is all virtual. So things are a little different, and, some things are harder, but some things are actually, a little easier. Like being able to share a live document and, work back and forth without having to arrange a time to meet. So do we have any other questions or comments? Okay, Caitlin, go ahead.
Do we always meet with the tutors over Zoom or something like that? Or do some of them prefer like emailing?
So I think right now most tutoring appointments happen live through Zoom, where it's just you and the tutor, unless it's a group tutoring session. Like A&P is frequently done by groups. We're not doing any in-person tutoring right now, not until the college changes the policies and COVID and et cetera, et cetera. But like Rick's talking, you can, he can help you edit a paper through Google Docs, so you don't have to spend time, but that is an option. If you do want to edit a paper in real time, face-to-face through Zoom, you can do that. So you and the tutor can work using whatever method's best for you and the tutor.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we do, as I said, it is kind of nice that, we have some of these digital tools now so that you can work it out to however works best for you. So there is a little bit more flexibility built into it right now, which is really nice. So do we have any other questions or comments? Yes, Val, go ahead.
I just want to put in that I have found that in my English class last semester, when we did have to Annie worked on Zoom with you and talk with some of your instructors on the different subjects, because they're willing to work with you. For right now, I have found early on, I was getting confused on my due dates, and it's like, I quick emailed my instructors, and they got on Zoom, and they literally went on and saw, oh, Val, this is what you missed. And it's like, I'm glad I'm talking to you now, because they opened it up. They were able to help me get caught up. And all of a sudden, here's going to the end of week 3, and I'm caught up on 1 and 2, and I already have half of my things done on week 3 because I reached out to the instructors. So even though you're going to go with tutors, which is really good too, but also talk with your instructors, because they're all here to help us succeed with being all this virtual world.
Right, absolutely, Val. I'm glad you brought that up, and we've touched on that a little bit, but this is another maybe challenge of this semester, is that, on Brightspace, you're going to have assignments that are due, and they're only open for a certain amount of time, right? And a lot of the assignments will close at, 11:59 on a Sunday night or whatever it is. And, that makes it a little tricky if you are a little bit behind, right? Because there's once the assignments close, like, what do, right? Great advice from Val, reach out to your instructors. If you miss something like that, if an assignment closes before you're able to get it in, you want to make that connection with your instructor right away to work it out, because it is just a matter of, figuring out the technology sometimes, right? We're all new to Brightspace, all of us, instructors included. So there are going to be some things that you'll run into that, are challenging, and they're IT related or, technical related. And we don't want you to get really stressed out about that. Instead, if you're running into a technical issue or, you miss a deadline on something that needs to be submitted, reach out to your instructor right away, okay? That's a really, really great piece of advice. So it looks like we are rounding out at almost 1 o'clock. So I think we can, unless Mike or Jeremy had some final last comments, did you want to? Yep,
Well,
Mike.
just to kind of follow up on that, in my 7 years of teaching, of every student who said, hey, like I had a death in the family or something, or, I have to work a lot to support my family and something is going on and they've needed an extension, I've given it to them. You know what I mean? As long as the student is honest and communicates with me beforehand, I'm usually able to work with them. And I know not every professor is like that, but if you have something that comes up in your life, obviously a lot of you have a lot going on. You have full-time jobs, you have families, teachers are humans too, and they often understand that. So don't be afraid to be candid with them. And hopefully they'll be willing to accommodate you. Cause I think most professors have a heart and are willing to work with you.
Yep, absolutely. I absolutely, it's just something to keep in mind, right? Instructors, especially when you're kind of first starting college, it can be a little intimidating and, they might feel a little at arm's length, but they're humans, right? We're all human beings. And, a lot of instructors here at EMCC understand what it's like to face a lot of challenges throughout their, throughout their academic and professional careers. So be open with your instructors. Let them know what's going on if something's going on. That's the only way they're going to know, and then they can help you from there. So we are, wow, at 1 o'clock exactly. That was timed perfectly. So I just want to thank everyone again, especially Mike, Jeremy. Thank you so much for sharing your stories, all these great tips. This session has been recorded, so we'll be posting it. I'll probably be sending it out next week or the week after, but we'll have somewhere we'll be posting these so you can refer back to them later. But really wonderful to see everyone, and I hope y'all have a great rest of your day. Bye.
I thought there